Last Sunday, we began a new 6-sermon series called We Are Cities Church. As many of you know, we've been through some distinct seasons in the life of our church since beginning the work of planting in January of 2015. There was that first season of 5 years of tabernacling in the Central Metro, from Minneapolis Academy, the Riverview Theater, to St. Thomas, to Concordia University, then to this building, and then purchasing this building in January of 2020 so that we could leave it sit empty for months while we worshiped outside. Season 1, being planted. In these last few years, from around about 2020 to a year ago, we talked about being rooted. And God met us in a powerful way in raising funds to renovate the educational space. And now the work on the steeple is done, even as we continue to finance the steeple and the current repairs, a season of being rooted. And we talked last fall about coming into this new season in the life of our church, a fresh season of growth. And as part of the last year, the pastors have done a little bit of extra spade work. So we met for months, doing some special meetings, revisiting who we are as a church, getting fresh clarity about what God has called us to. And last week, Jonathan said, if you've been around Cities Church for a while, don't expect to be surprised by anything you hear. If you're brand new, we're excited for you to meet our church, get to know us and what drives us. And he said, if you're semi-new, we hope this might fill in some gaps for you on what God's called us to be as a church and what drives us. And Jonathan finished the sermon last Sunday by introducing a fresh expression of our stated mission as a church. Now, our mission has been and always will be to make disciples. So Jesus says, it's a great commission, make disciples. That's what he calls us to do. And when it comes to making disciples, we're saying in a fresh way, we want to make joyful disciples who remember Jesus' realness in all of life. We want to make joyful disciples who remember his realness in all of life. And so this Sunday, and in the next 3 weeks, we'd like to flesh that out for you. What do we have in mind? And in particular, we want to introduce a new fourfold way of talking about our calling as joyful disciples. So here's the 4 things we're going to walk through. We are Jesus worshipers. We are joyful servants. We are generous disciplers and welcoming witnesses. Those are the 4, and that's the plan for these coming weeks. Now, I know many of you have thought, we've talked for 10 years about a threefold calling: worshipers, servants, missionaries. And we've just decided to cut the pie different for a while. Right? Same pie. We've cut it in 3 big slices: worshipers, servants, missionaries. Now we're going to cut the pie in 4 slices. All right, so next Sunday, joyful servants, then generous disciplers. 3 weeks from now, welcoming witnesses. And this morning, first and foremost, the thing that remains most unchanged, no tweaks. We are Jesus worshipers. We worship Jesus. Maybe you've seen it on the back doors. We put it on the back doors. We got no plans to take it off the back doors. We worship Jesus. We love one another. We seek the good of the cities. And if you want to know what's the first thing to say about Cities Church or any healthy biblical church, first thing to say, we worship Jesus. If an outsider asks, what are they about? That church on Summit, it's all the construction. It used to have falling pieces, but now it's fixed. What is that church about? And if you're an insider and you want to remember in all the distraction, in all the details, what is our church about? We worship Jesus. That's the most fundamental thing to say about our activity, our initiative, our effort. So let's ponder this morning, what does each of those three words carry? We worship Jesus. What is carried in each of those three words for us? What do we mean by worship? And what's significant about the we? We say we, not just I. We say we. And why do we say Jesus? Why not just say God? Why not say the Father? Why not say the Trinity? To be really theologically correct, you say the Trinity. Why do we say Jesus? And as we do that, I'd like to make some connections to that John 12 passage that Dan just read for us. So let me give you three reasons why our first and foremost calling as a church is to be Jesus worshipers. We'll start with the word worship. Number one, first reason, God made you to worship. Not just us. We're not doing us yet. We'll get to us. But first, you, me. God made you to worship. I know that about you. This is very personal, and this is all important. If you don't realize this about yourself, then your human life will be more confusing than it should. And if you know this about yourself, and if you own it, then life will make more sense. Your thoughts, your desires, your impulses will make more sense if you know this about you. God made you. You were created by Him. You do not simply exist. You are not matter plus chance plus time. God had designs when He made you. And the overarching design is that your life reflect His worth and His value. In other words, God made you to make much of Him. And the good news in this is that in doing that, He made us to enjoy what He made us for, to enjoy Him and express that heart's satisfaction through words and deeds. So this is a body and soul design that God has for humans. Or we might say it this way: God designed you to worship Him. Not only are your eyes and ears and your lips and tongue and arms and legs and hands and feet designed to display His value in His created world, but also your mind and your heart were made to glorify Him. He gave us brains and He gave us emotions that we might think true thoughts of Him and feel the way we ought to feel about Him, that He might be glorified. In other words, God wired us to be worshipers. To be human is to have a heart that worships. You can't turn it off. The problem with humans isn't that we cease worshiping, but that we turn from God to worship other things. Sin is worship gone wrong. And so here's how Paul puts it in Romans chapter 1 about us, about the human condition. He diagnoses the most fundamental thing that's wrong with humans, that needs God's help. He says, what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power, His divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that God has made. Nature's telling you got a creator. So they, humans, are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. That's the inner person, the mind, the heart, thoughts, desires. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. He's devolving in sin. 17th century philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal put it like this. He says, there was once in man a true happiness of which there now remain to him only the mark and empty trace, which he tries in vain to fill from all his surroundings, seeking from things absent the help he does not obtain from things present. It's the human predicament. What I've got doesn't make me happy, so I'm trying to get something else to make me happy. But he says, all these are inadequate because the infinite abyss can only be filled by an infinite and immutable object, that is to say, only by God himself. That's what it means to be a worshiper at heart. And in John 12, some Greeks, he's talking about philosophy, some Greeks come seeking to fill the infinite abyss. And so they come to Jerusalem to worship. It's a good start. Look at verses 20 and 22 in John 12. Now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and they asked him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. All right, so some Greeks show up in the capital city of the Jews. Significant. And they have come to worship, John says. God made them to worship, and they are seeking to worship. They want to fill this infinite abyss. Their hearts are restless. Who knows how far and wide they have been searching, how their restless hearts have led them in their quest to find the only one who fills the infinite abyss. And now, these Greeks they're very close. They have come, of all places, to Jerusalem. In fact, in making this request of one of Jesus' disciples, and they asked Philip. You know, Philip's a Greek name. Philip was the name of Alexander the Great's father, Philip of Macedon. Philippi was named after Philip. Philip's a famous Greek name. So they come, oh, there's a disciple named Philip? Let's Greeks talk to Philip. And they are even closer to the end of their quest than they know as they ask to see Jesus. Now, let's make something clear about worship, about Greeks coming to Jerusalem, and about us gathering here this morning. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near, that's the worship term, whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. So draw near, the language of worship. Draw near with hungry souls. That's what we did this morning. We came here with hungry souls, acknowledged or not, to this building to worship. And that's what drew them to Jerusalem, to worship. And most importantly, we draw near in our hearts and our minds, not just in the physical space, not just coming here with our bodies. We draw near in our minds with our faith, with our attention, as Clint talked about, with our focus. We turn our hearts and minds and our words of praise and our posture toward God in worship. And Hebrews 11:6 says that the kind of drawing near that pleases God is not only drawing near that believes in him. Like, just to believe that he exists, it's not enough. That doesn't please him. Believes that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. You came here this morning, if you came with a good heart, for reward. You didn't mainly come to give. God didn't need you to come to give. He wanted you to come to be rewarded for the infinite abyss, to taste some of its filling in the act of worship. He fills the abyss. He satisfies the soul. He feeds the hungry in soul. God is pleased by those who take their longing, restless, aching, thirsty souls and they draw near to him for satisfaction. He is pleased by worshipers who come hungry for him. Worshipers who come hedonistically to be rewarded by him. The heart of worship is satisfaction in God. And the praises we offer, and the hands we raise in worship, and the words we speak, and the lives we offer during the week, these are not mere expressions of satisfied hearts, but these are also the appointed consummation of hearts that are seeking satisfaction. So as C.S. Lewis put it, our emptiness and his filling of us draws us to fullness of joy in worship. We worship not just because we were satisfied. We worship that we might experience fullness of satisfaction in offering him our praise and being satisfied in him. So God made you to glorify him by enjoying him forever. Or we might say, God made you to worship. That's the first reason we worship Jesus together. Second reason, God made us to worship together. These Greeks coming to Jerusalem do something really natural by coming to a designated place at a designated time to worship with other people. They went up to worship at the feast in Jerusalem. Not only do they personally long for God and want to know him and appreciate him and praise him, but something in them longs to know him, enjoy him, worship him together with others. This is real basic to our humanity as well. The Creator is worthy not only of our individual praises in private, but he's worthy of public, corporate praise and worship together. Corporate worship is a public act. You know that, right? Those doors are open. Anybody can walk in here. If you're here praising Jesus together this morning, this is a public act on Summit Avenue in St. Paul. You came to Summit for this public act of worshiping Jesus. The God-given human longing is not only to worship him in our hearts, in private, and in our homes, with our families, but we want to gather with others to declare our praise together. God made us for corporate worship. So what do we do in corporate worship? Well, together, we hear God's word read and taught and preached together. And we respond in praise together. And we give thanks. And we sing together, and we pray together. We'll come to this table in a few minutes together. We give of our finances together. And we give our attention and receive attention from each other. These are glorious things that happen in the moments before the service and after the service. When I was a kid, it was an 11 o'clock service that we had. We had to keep it tight. It was on TV in South Carolina. The service never ended before noon. Like, if it was right at noon, that was really good. 12:05, that's fine. 12:10, by that point, you're starting to think, we got to beat the Methodists to lunch. Like, it's past noon here. We got to get out to the restaurants or whatever. We don't ever go till noon. We're usually done easy by 11:30. One of the reasons we do that is we want you to hang out and minister to each other. The give, the take, the Christian conversation, being strengthened together in our words for each other, in what we hear from each other. There's no rush for us to get out of here. And that also is part of worship being corporate and together. And in it all, we remember that the essence of worship is satisfaction in God. Our lives as individual worshipers seek satisfaction in God. And the reason that we gather in corporate worship is to seek satisfaction in him together. So God made us to glorify him by enjoying him together. Third reason, final reason. God made us to worship Jesus. I think I said earlier that the Greeks who come and worship ask better than they know. They speak better than they know when they say to Philip, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." They've come to Jerusalem to worship. They have come seeking the true God. They've come to fill the infinite abyss in their soul. And apparently, these worshipers in Jerusalem, they hear there's this teacher, this healer. Some say he might be the Messiah. And they're intrigued. They'd like to meet him. And so they approach the disciple with a Greek name, Philip. And Philip, it's interesting, grabs another disciple with a Greek name, Andrew, the two, and they come together to Jesus to ask, "Can these Greeks see you, Jesus?" And Jesus pivots here in a way that none of them expected. This is an amazing pivot. Did you see this as Dan read this? Did it trouble you? And we don't hear any more about the Greeks after this. You just kind of have to assume how the story ends. Take a cue from Jesus' words. Their coming and their inquiring of Jesus signals something for Jesus. Let's look at verses 23 and 24. Here's Jesus' answer. Philip comes with Andrew. "Can these Greeks see you? They want to see you, Jesus." And Jesus answers, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Now, where in the world does that response come from? Like just a simple yes or no, Jesus. Like there's some Greeks here. They'd like to see you. Like yes or no. And Jesus says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." What kind of answer is that? First, what's this hour he's talking about? What's the hour? This is not the first time John's mentioned the hour. But until now, it's always been that it's not the hour. So John chapter 2, wedding feast at Cana, they run out of wine. Jesus' mother comes to ask him, and he says, "What's this have to do with me? It is not yet my hour." And in John chapter 7, some Jewish officials are seeking to arrest him. And John comments, "No one laid a hand on him because his hour had not yet come." Again, chapter 8, they seek to arrest him. John says, "No one arrested him because his hour had not yet come." Over and over again in the Gospel of John, the hour hasn't come, but some Greeks, non-Jews, Greeks arrive in Jerusalem to worship at the feast. They inquire if they can see Jesus, and now he says, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." Greeks have come to worship. That is, Gentiles, nations, non-Jews are streaming in to Jerusalem to worship, asking about the Messiah. That's a signal that the prophecies are beginning to be fulfilled. Greeks are here for worship. Jesus' climactic hour must be coming. The prophecies are coming true about the nations coming to worship Israel's God. So the Messiah must be drawing near to his moment when he will accomplish his work that the Father sent him to do. His hour has come to go to the cross. Which is not, of course, the answer that they're expecting, the disciples or the Greeks. However, their wish to see Jesus has not been rejected, but it's been redirected. He doesn't say they can't see me. He says, how they're going to see him. It was an admirable wish and request that they had. It's not rejected. They came to Jerusalem to worship, and they wanted to see Jesus. They are on the trail. And if they remain in Jerusalem, they will soon see the most important sight of Jesus. Horrible as it will be at first. If you want to see me, Jesus says, my time has come to be seen. My time has come to be lifted up. My time has come to be glorified, to be seen. And it's not going to mean overthrowing Rome and seizing the crown. It will mean laying down my life. Like a grain of wheat, I give myself first to die. And then much fruit. Oh, there will be much fruit. There will be great fruit that will come for Jews and for Greeks. So these Greeks have come to worship, and they will indeed see him. They will get a sight that is far greater than they could have anticipated or imagined. And it will be terrible at first. And then they will see that it's wonderful. The horrible cross will become the wonderful cross. They will witness the depths of Jesus' humiliation that will prove to be the very height of his glory, the one who is Israel's long-promised Messiah, as shocking and unexpected as this cross will be. And as they see him in his divine and human excellencies, united in one person, culminating at the cross and in his resurrection, they will have all they wish to see and far more to fill the infinite abyss in their souls. The desire to see Jesus was far more profound than these Greeks could have guessed. They wished for amazement in the presence of someone great, and what they got instead at the cross anticipated the heavenly vision that the Apostle John would see on the island of Patmos. And there's a connection here between what these Greeks would see and what the Apostle John, who wrote John 12, saw in Revelation chapter 5. In John's vision, he's in heaven, and none in heaven or on the earth or under the earth is first found worthy to open the scroll of history and break its seals. That's decrees of judgment for God's enemies. That's offer of salvation for his people. And John, in his vision, sensing the weight of the moment, none's found worthy. John begins to weep. What about Jesus? What about the one that discipled him? What about his beloved friend Jesus? He's in prison on this island because of his witness to Jesus. What about Jesus? And in the vision, one of the elders in heaven turns to John and says, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And so John, having heard this, it's good news. Having heard this, he turns, and what does he see? Not a lion. There's no lion. He just heard about a lion. Turns to see the lion. No lion. This is what he says in verse 6. "I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes." We might wrongly assume that John is disappointed with this sight. He wants to see a lion, and there's a lamb. John's not disappointed. It's not a letdown to see the lamb. That's not how John reports it. The lamb is no loss. The lamb is gain. The one who is just declared to be the only one who is worthy is no less Lion of Judah. Lion didn't go away, but he's also the Lamb that was slain. Lamb is added to Lion. Doesn't replace Lion. He's more than Lion. He's slain Lamb, standing in resurrection strength. The Lion became Lamb without ceasing to be Lion. He did not jettison his lion-like glories, but he adds to his greatness with lamb-like glories. He is a lamb standing, not dead, not slumped over, not kneeling. He is alive and ready with fullness of power. That's the 7 horns. Fullness of power. Seeing and reigning over all. That's the 7 eyes. And so it will be for the worshiping Greeks in John chapter 12 who wish to see Jesus. When they ask for a lion, and what they end up seeing is the Lamb. Whatever disappointment they experience in the moment in not having their immediate request fulfilled, and whatever devastations they endure on Good Friday as they watch in horror, it all changed on the 3rd day. Then their desire was answered beyond their greatest dreams, not just to see Messiah, but to see God himself, the very Lion of heaven. And not just divine, but the added lamb-like glory of our own flesh and blood. That same blood being spilled for us to not only show us glory, but invite us into the glory. Jew and Gentile, Greek and barbarian. Which leads to that last question we asked at the beginning. We said, why, as a church, do we say we worship Jesus? We could have correctly filled in that sentence in other ways. Why not just say we worship God? Why not just say we worship the Father? Why not say we worship the Trinity? Use like a theological word. Well, one, let me say this. Worshiping Jesus is not at odds with worshiping the Father or the Trinity. No one is happier when we worship Jesus than the Father. He made the world to make much of his Son as its champion, that humans would worship Jesus. No one's happier when we worship Jesus than the Father. And the Holy Spirit, whose main calling is to exalt and lift up and draw attention to Jesus. And no one's happier when we worship the Father than Jesus, our mediator, the way, the truth, and the life. So this thing goes back and forth. You see it here in John 12. Jesus speaks of himself being glorified, which will mean, among other things, he's going to be worshiped. He is being exalted to the place of worship. And he prays in verse 28, Father, glorify your name. And then the voice comes from heaven, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And how's that going to happen? At the cross. He's going to glorify his name as the Son is lifted up and glorified at the cross. It's a conspiracy of glory. This would be a very good conspiracy to get into. I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. So who's being glorified? Who's worthy of worship? Jesus or the Father? That's a bad either or. That's not a good either or. And this is a glimpse of the back and forth that we find throughout the New Testament. But I'm going to ask this question, all right? Because we have a certain way of saying it at our church. We put a certain way of saying it on the door. We're coming to you with this fourfold calling saying we are Jesus worshipers. We're not saying we're Trinity worshipers. That's not the word we chose there. Though it would have been okay, it wouldn't have been wrong. Why would we say Jesus and not Father? So back to the lion and lamb. There is a special fitness in humans worshiping the God who became human and died as human and rose as human and lives forever as human. For our eyes to see him, our ears to hear his voice, our words to praise him, our eternal lives to exalt him. Jesus is the litmus test of Christian worship. You were indeed made for God, with an infinite abyss in your soul that only God can fill, with a restlessness satisfied in nothing less than the divine. And, added to that, we were made for the God-man, for the greatness of God himself who draws near in our own flesh, in our own blood, in our own circumstances, in our own suffering. The lion-like greatness of God in his divine glory is sweetened, and it's deepened, and it's accentuated by his lamb-like glory and human excellencies. So, we exist to glorify God by enjoying Jesus together forever. We exist to worship Jesus. And as we come to the table, I want to ask a practical question. As we have worked on this fresh fourfold expression, this fourfold way of slicing the pie and adding the key adjectives for these terms, we as your pastors have worked up 2 self-evaluation questions for each of these 4 callings. You'll be seeing that in the coming days. We hope these are helpful in life group. Hope these are helpful in your personal private prayer time. Hope these are helpful in community group, other contexts. These are the pastors have put together 8 questions that we think it would be very good for us to be asking ourselves and each other as a church. 2 for each of the callings. Let me end with one of them for Jesus worshipers. Here's how it goes. What is currently fueling or draining your ability to see and savor Jesus? All right? And think of this week. Think of this weekend. What in your life? What habits? What patterns? What people? What events? What circumstances? What's currently fueling, on the one hand, fueling your seeing and savoring of Jesus, or draining it? Do you feel like you're seeing him and savoring him? We're made for this. Is it happening? And if it is, what means, what God-given means is helping that? Or what other means is blocking it, hindering it? What's helping? What's blocking our seeing and savoring, our worshiping of Jesus? So as we take and eat these emblems of his body and blood here this morning, and encounter him in faith and nourish our souls in him, let's consecrate ourselves afresh to him. Let's come here to receive his grace. Grace for failures and grace for the power to seek ways that aren't draining, but fueling in our lives. Because our first and foremost calling as humans and as a church is we worship Jesus. This is a meal for the members of City's Church. But if you'd say with us this morning, I worship Jesus. I receive the calling. I embrace the calling. And in all my failures and sins, I want to worship him with my life and give glad consent to that. We'd invite you to eat with us. The pastors will bring the bread. His body is the true bread. Let us serve you.